Hello, my name is Amanda Sage for ISA 4220 Server System Security Service, Spring Semester 2017. I'll be covering the Windows Server 2012 R2 and Ubuntu Server 16.4.1 LTS, both their operating systems and firewalls for this presentation. There are 7 key capabilities to the Windows Server 2012 R2. The first capability is server virtualization. This allows for cross-platform support. This is great for environments that require the use of both Windows and Linux platforms. Its storage capabilities are less expensive and has a higher performance rate. This is great for when an organization is trying to get the best bang for their buck. The third is networking. And their networking capabilities allows for both wireless and wired connectivity, known as hybrid networking. With the increased need for wireless access, the increase in performance makes for a more efficient networking ability or setting. 4 would be server management and automation. This allows for better server management from basically another location, and instead of an employee having to go to a database to work on the server, they can actually access it from wherever they are, home or the office. The 5th is web and application platform. This consists of applications that can be constructed and deployed in-house or in the cloud. Kind of like the server management, it can be done anywhere. Access and information protection is the 6th capability. This allows for client access to access corporate assets while ensuring information safety and security. The 7th is virtual desktop infrastructure. This offers straightforward deployment and use. This portion of the presentation is going to be over the Windows Server 2012 R2 specs, its locks, its limits, its minimums, and its maximums. As far as users go for this server, it is honestly based on how many licenses are purchased. Some servers have a minimum, some have a max. This one is just kind of an unlimited based on what's purchased. The max amount of SMB, which is server message block connections, is 16 million. This provides shared access to files, printers, and serial ports. The maximum RRAS, which is routing and remote access connections, is also unlimited. Max IAS, which is Internet Authentication Service connections, is 2 billion. And its minimum processor to actually run this server requires a 64-bit processor or a 1.4 gigahertz processor. The maximum number of 64-bit sockets is 64, and the maximum RAM is 4 terabytes, whereas it's a minimum of 512 megabytes to actually run this server. Minimum disk space is 32 gigabytes for you to be able to run the server, and the server can join domains and also has virtualization capabilities. The virtual processors per host is 2048. The virtual processors per virtual machine is 64. And it actually can run as many as 8,000 virtual machines. Okay, the server roles that the Windows Server 2012 R2 server actually performs is a big list. I'm not going to go over every one of these as well. It does have Active Directory certificate services and domain services, along with Active Directory Federation services. It is an application server. It is also can act as a DHCP server, a DNS server, a fax server, and it also contains file services. It does have networking policy and access services, print and document services. It allows for remote access, which is great whenever somebody is not hardwired into it or right there beside it. It provides terminal services, gateways, and application sharing. It also provides web services, Windows deployment services, Windows Essentials, and Wins Server. Another feature that, or another role that it actually plays is it allows for Windows Media Services support, which is also streaming. It is an optional service. It's not a yes or no. It's definitely an optional. All right, I am now going to go over some of the features of the Windows Server 2012 R2. It has RODC, which is read-only domain controller. It automatically does virtual machine activation as a guest. The next thing is actually I found really, really valuable and very interesting. I'll actually kind of go over this a little later on in the presentation. It's the Best Practices Analyzer. It comes with that, and like I said, I'll go over that shortly. At Branchcast hosted server, it comes with a Windows control panel, of course, distributed file system replication, data duplication, direct access, direct memory in a virtualized setting. It also comes with a Microsoft Management Console. It's got minimal server interface, which is good because you don't want too many people being able to get into the server. And comes with Windows PowerShell. It's got server licensing logging, SMB Direct and SMB over RDMA, storage management services, and volume activation services. One interesting little feature that I saw in regards to the Windows Server 2012 R2 was that it didn't come with a search bar feature down at the bottom left corner of the start bar. Instead of having this down in that bottom left corner, all you have to do is simply start typing while you're on the start menu, and it will automatically on the right hand side of the screen start popping up with the search menu along with all the options that you're actually looking for. I thought this was actually pretty cool and interesting. All right, I'm going to touch on some best practices for the Windows Server 2012 R2. This also goes for a lot of the Windows servers that are out there today that came before 2012 R2. First thing you want to do when setting it up is you want to rename your host name, or also known as a computer name. You want to make sure you rename it to something that you're going to remember and find. The second thing is you're going to want to make sure you set up correct server time zones. This is absolutely imperative to make sure everything is in sync on your server. This is really, really important whenever it comes to setting up firewalls. You want everything to run in sync to a T. If not, then you are going to be a mess. You want to make sure that you also assign a static IP address to your server. You want to establish the net mask and also your gateway IP addresses. When you're setting it up, you're going to want to run current updates. You're going to make sure all the security updates are correct, all your application updates are up to date as well. This is definitely great on a security level. This makes sure that all patches are made and these it hardens and actually makes these applications and the server itself a little bit less vulnerable to attack. You also want to make sure that your firewalls enable. That's another thing. That's another great security perk there when as far as best practices go. You want to also disable unused accounts. You don't want just regular little accounts just hanging out there. They are kind of juicy fruit for whenever it comes to someone trying to come in and attack a system and take over. You also want to make sure all weak passwords are modified. Make sure that any passwords are changed and our automatic passwords are changed and they are changed into something that is strong. You want to enable remote desktop and access control. So whenever you are not on the grounds or standing right beside the server, you are able to remote into your server and access it and make changes. And if it goes down, you want to make sure you get it set back up. You want to also designate your server for one purpose. You don't want a server running multiple things. You want to have a database server separate from a customer database server separate from HR database server. You do not want to run multiple run your server on doing multiple services. You also want to make sure that auditing, backup, and recovery is enabled, and you want to make sure that you stay on top of auditing, backup, and recovery. If something goes down, you want to get it back up and you want to get it going. You also want to just kind of log and manage your server to make sure everything is up to its best practices and everything is up to par where it needs to be. As I mentioned earlier, in regards to the features of Windows Server 2012 R2, it actually comes with a best practices analyzer. So it kind of is there to help you remember the little bitty things that everyone forgets, because let's face it, we can't remember everything whenever it comes to a system or computer. It analyzes and goes through and picks out the roles for the rules and roles that security should have assigned to it so it functions correctly. Same with its performance. It goes through and makes rules for makes sure that the correct rules are implemented for performance. Make sure everything was configured correctly. Basically, it's kind of like a checklist, a checkbox that goes through, and it goes through policy and operation and pre and post deployment and prereqs and everything. So I really thought this was a cool tool for the Windows Server 2012 R2 for somebody who is definitely might not be so familiar with setting up a server, but also it's a great little checklist for people who are all about setting them up and do them every day. Everybody always forgets something, right? Alrighty, whenever it comes to Windows Server 2012 R2 hardening, you want to do the following. You obviously want to stop any unnecessary services that are going on. All that does is clog up the system and it opens up a window for an intruder or an attacker to come in and exploit your system. You also want to turn off unused features for the same reason why you want to stop unnecessary services. You want to create policies for every single layer. I would say base it off the OSI model. All 7 layers you want to have policies for, and within those policies you have to create certain rules. That's what actually creates the policy, and then you actually get it implemented into the system. Another great tool that Windows Server 2012 R2 has is the security configuration wizard. This allows you in kind of a GUI setting to go through and select the roles of what your server does. It also allows you to select client features, in other words, what the users are going to be needing. It also allows you to select the options for the administrator, which is obviously yourself, if you are the administrator or if you are setting it up for another one. It also allows you to select additional services throughout. In a moment, I'll actually go over what I found really neat with what Windows Server 2012 offers with PowerShell ISE and how it helps you kind of find out what's running and everything at the same time. But we'll get to that in a minute. You want to also enable the Windows Firewall. I did find while setting everything up, it was easier for me to kind of make sure that it was disabled. So then I could go in and make all the changes I needed before, so I didn't run into any bumps along the way. And then once everything got set up, I went on to enable the firewall so everything could run as it needs to. While setting up my Windows server, I found a really cool tool while trying to set it up and figure out hardening practices. It's the PowerShell and the PowerShell ISE tool. These two are two different tools. One, they're set up kind of like a command line prompt. Their command is a little bit longer. I was trying to figure out what services were actually running to kind of aid me in the hardening process and everything, and see what I need to disable and not disable. These two prompts are, like I said, similar to the command prompts. The regular Windows PowerShell, that one you just enter in a longer command than you would on the command line itself, and it'll actually pop up with everything running. What I found really neat was the PowerShell ISE. And someone like me that's used to kind of working with more of the GUI system, more or less than the command line, this was absolutely wonderful. As I was actually typing in the command prompts, trying to figure out what services that I was looking for, it actually pops up with the different prompts. Like with this particular thing, it was the get services prompt. And whenever I put get dash, it actually comes up with a list of command prompts that you get to choose from. So I was able to go to service. Then whenever I went on into choosing where, it actually popped up with a different list of choosing object, and so on and so on. So it kind of helped someone like me who is not very familiar with commands, that needs kind of a little bit of guidance going through. Definitely helps me navigate this system, and definitely helps with the with all the hardening processes and everything like that. I'm going to go over server hardening a little bit more in depth for the Windows Server 2012 R2. First is going to start with the basic prep install. Do not allow a newly installed machine access to an unprotected outside network. You can, however, allow it that access once the machine has been hardened. If you put the machine out on that outside network without it being secured, it is extremely vulnerable. Next, you want to install service packs from Microsoft along with the Microsoft hotfixes that it offers. For user account policies, you want a minimum length for your passwords. Passwords should be complex. You will want to implement lockout policy that allows the users a certain number of login attempts. As far as user rights go, do not allow admins and authenticated users access to the server from the network. Do not allow users ability to access the network using a logon service, and do not allow users the right to act as the operating system itself. For security settings, you want to delete guest accounts. Do not allow users to create or log on to other Microsoft accounts. Do not allow idle sessions. Network clients should always sign communications digitally with or without server permissions. Network servers should always sign communications digitally, also with or without client client consent. For network access controls, when it comes to network access controls, do not allow any anonymous activity to happen whatsoever on the network between the clients or anything like that. You also want to implement default security model and sharing activity on local accounts. For network security settings, Local systems should be allowed to use computers' identity for NT LAN manager. You'll want to implement Kerberos encryption. Always, always, always have encryption. This definitely helps in hardening that system. Windows Firewall should be enabled for public, private, and domain profiles. You never want to completely disable a firewall. The only time you don't want that firewall working is if you are not on an outside network. In other words, you can't connect to the internet or anything else. All inbound traffic should be blocked by the firewall by default. Hash values for LAN should not be stored, and null sessions should be disabled. For Active Directory domain security, always encrypt channel data and when possible secure and or sign channel data. Session keys should be strong and as current as possible. Cache should contain previous number of logins as well. As far as an audit policy goes, you always want those policies put into place, especially for auditing. Any type of policies that have to do with user accounts should be enabled, configured, and utilized. Policy changes and use should also be included in the audit policy. This ensures that all changes are properly implemented and accounted for to ensure the system security. Event log, you want to configure log size and retention methods. Also use outside parties or companies to come in and install their software. Makes it a little bit easier to log those, and it shoots it straight over to those guys. In this case, obviously, we're not going to do anything like that. Physical security of the actual server itself. In this class, we don't have access to the physical security of our boxes, so we can't really get too in-depth as far as accessing them and how we're going to protect them. Professor Green's the only one who can do that for us. But as far as physical security goes, there are some things we can do from our end to protect our machines. Systems should be configured with a logon option before being shut down. Implementation of a screensaver that shuts down when the system is not in use. So if we get up and walk away for a little while, it will shut down so nobody can get into that sucker and mess around with our stuff. Password should be set up to access the hardware itself, which I believe we do have a password for that. There might be something a little more in depth that we can't access at this time. And then the system should be configured to prevent unauthorized media from accessing the device. So nobody can come in and just put in a thumb drive and suck out all our information. All right, in regards to the Windows Firewall, on a technical aspect, Windows Firewall is a stateful host firewall. It runs on the network layer from the 7-layer OSI model. It inspects all IPv4 and IPv6 network traffic. It blocks incoming traffic that is not solicited traffic or traffic that has been given permission to enter the network or the system itself. And it also allows most all outgoing traffic except for certain configured ICMP messages. Windows Firewall structures or architectures, it depends on the NAT mapping table and the state table. The NAT mapping table is managed by the NAT driver, and it keeps track of all information passing throughout the network. And it contains TCP connections, TCP IP driver, UDP connections, ICMP traffic, and that is for both V4 and V6. And it also is a storage spot for the rules that you actually set up for the firewall. The second table is the state table. This tracks all traffic and activity on one network connection, logging what interactions take place between one another. This also is kind of where what I'm sure everybody is familiar with, the TCP IP handshake. This is kind of where this transaction goes, and this is kind of where the information in regards to that handshake, when it comes to the SYN-ACK transfers. It kind of holds this information there and keeps track of it. Windows Firewall kind of is set up with some protocols. It controls the protocols or allows them to flow through or whatnot. ICMPv4, which is Internet Control Message Protocol. This sends messages and error messages so that the networks may be able to analyze. Same thing with IPv6 and ICMVP6. Both IPv6 route and frag protocols, along with the ICM protocol for VP6, sends messages and errors as well. TCP protocol is Transmission Control Protocol. This protocol provides a packet delivery connection when it comes to a service. It guarantees delivery and is part of the TCP IP handshake. UDP is User Diagram Protocol. This provides fast delivery of packets, but it does not guarantee that delivery like the TCP protocol does. GRE is Generic Routing Encapsulation. This is a stateless protocol, and it basically encapsulates generic network layer packets. PGM is Pragmatic General Multicast Protocol. It streams data to numerous network receivers in a reliable fashion. VRRP is Virtual Router Redundancy Protocol. Subnet hosts can quickly access the default gateway by using this protocol. L2TP is Layer 2 Tunneling Protocol. It utilizes and allows VPN access. Some of the best practices for the Windows Firewall include simple and complex firewall rules. Also, application filters is definitely a part of the best practices. And also, you want to put those rules in kind of a general order where what is more important is at the top compared to what is less important at the bottom. More Windows Firewall best practices include unauthorized user and user set functionality should be set. It should include the use of the IP address. Domain name and UR set should be fully qualified. Users and firewall clients should be given boundaries. Protocol definitions should not overlap one another. This may cause a little confusion within the system if it does. Access and network rules should be written based on their purpose for communicating between one another. SANS top 20 vulnerability list, that should be followed. When it comes to configuring packet filtering and ports, all ports on the SANS top 20 vulnerability list should be disabled. Network-based IDS run firewall along with the network-based intrusion detection. You want to run firewall with a router to prevent DOS attacks, and which is denial of service attacks and penetration. You want to block against that. Patch firewall on a regular basis to ensure safety of your firewall. You want to enable the firewall to log, so if there is any incident that you that you can review that comes across, you may be able to review it later and harden your system to that threat so it does not happen, the threat does not present itself and actually accomplish its mission by penetrating your system. You want to monitor firewall security bulletins so that you may be up to date on the latest threats so that you can prepare your system to defend against those threats. A little bit of a Windows Firewall hardening overview, along with some of the steps that I did to further harden my firewall. First is change control. Any changes in a system or firewall control should be documented to protect current and former employees along with the organization. Same with users. Firewall documentation should, everything should be documented, all rules inside and out, whether they are implemented or not, and why or why not they were not implemented or why they were. Patches keep operating system current so that the firewall may be successful. The firewall itself must be patched and up to date so that it may function properly itself. Backup, you want to make sure you have backup procedures. They should be put into place, and this should back up the firewall on a constant basis. This includes all actions and logs that it detects or contains. Alerts is when a firewall sends out an alert, proper policies and procedures should be put into place so that the incident may be handled swiftly and properly and taken care of swiftly and properly. While configuring my firewall, I made sure I turn the firewall on both my private network and my public network. I also configured it to notify me when the firewall blocks a new application. I also customized the user account controls, which is UAC, to alert me when applications try to make a change to my computer. I also turned on Windows Smart Screen so that it may warn and protect me from unrecognized applications and files. The next portion of this presentation, I'll be going over Ubuntu 16.04.1 LTS operating system and firewall. I will be exploring the aspects of the technical side of both. I will be exploring and going over best practices for both the operating system and the firewall. And I will also be going over hardening for both the operating system and the firewall. The Ubuntu 16.04.1 LTS comes in a 64-bit and 32-bit versions. Whenever it comes to Ubuntu, it is a Linux system, and all Linux systems, along with Ubuntu, is an open source system. So you can freely get online and download whichever version that you need to run on your actual unit. 64-bit requires the AMD 64 or the EM64T architecture for processing. You've got 2 gigahertz dual core processors or better is going to be your minimum for that. A minimum of a 2 gigabyte memory system, a 25 gigabyte of free hard drive space is required to install Ubuntu system onto it. And main installer for media is going to be your DVD drive, USB, network install, etc. Alrighty, the Ubuntu operating system, in regards to a technical aspect, it supports all Linux systems and services as usual. It is a DNS. It provides network services. These services are printing service capabilities, bridging, network time protocol, which is NTP, dynamic host configuration protocol, which is DHCP, switching and routing. Security services that it provides is console security, firewall, including IP table, which is the IP tables, uncomplicated firewall, which is UFW, app armor, certificate management, eCrypts, which help automate mounted encryption processes. Negros, which is logging services, network analyzer, and Moonin, which is network and endpoint performance trending, answers the question, why is my computer slower today? What has changed? It pretty much keeps track of everything, so you can figure out what's going on with that system. Ubuntu also supports web servers such as Apache 2, PHP, script language, Ruby on Rails, which I'm sure a lot of us in this class have already experienced with a 3010, ISA 3010, and Apache Tomcat. Squid the proxy server, file servers it supports is FTP, NFS, CUPS printer server, and ISCSI initiator. It also supports email services such as Postfix, XM4, Dovecoat, Mailman, mail filtering. Chat, it provides chat services for an IRC server, Jabber IM server, which is instant message server. And version control system, Bazaar. It's designed to assist in collaboration of community open source products. Git is used to pull down software packages from GitHub, which I believe we use this in this class as well. Samba, which is a printer server, file server, and domain controller. In a virtualization aspect, it's libvirt, Cloud Images and UV Tool, Ubuntu Cloud, LXD, and LXC. Ubuntu operating systems also supports control groups, VPN, OpenVPN, which is open source clustering, DRBD, snaps, which is a new feature for the 16.04.1 release. There's a new tool called Snapcraft. This allows developers to deliver new versions of applications while remaining on a stable base operating system for a longer period of time. Snap applications are isolated from the rest of the system, and they ease the concern of applications impacting other ones on the system itself. Alrighty, I'm going to start going over Ubuntu 16.04.1 LTS operating system best practices. First, you want to ensure that the latest updates are installed, just like you had to do with the Windows system. You can utilize a GUI on this Linux system as well. As you all know, a lot of people are a little more familiar with the GUI system than they are with the control line, but you know, you can use either or on here to obtain your updates. You want to disable Unity online search feature. This feature actually records all of your search information using keywords and such, and sends it over to wonderful places like Facebook and Twitter, and Amazon, and all those wonderful companies that love to get a hold of as much information they can to stalk us with trying to sell us things. Obviously, it's best to disable this for privacy reasons. Also, you know, you don't really want somebody keeping track of what you're looking at all the time. I know I don't. Let's see, another best practice is only utilize the server for one purpose if possible. You want to assign a static IP address to it, just like running with Windows are the same kind of similar best practices here. You want to utilize NTP. You want to ensure appropriate access controls are in place. Disable root if it's not already been. You don't want anybody getting a hold of root and destroying the entire system in one or two keystrokes. You want to perform regular reviews of access controls. You want to also disable Ubuntu GUI for servers if possible, because it is something that not a lot of people know how to get into, so somebody can't break into there and maneuver around very easily unless they really, really know what they're doing. More applications and processes equals more potential vulnerabilities as well. So you also want to disable the GUI if possible, because it can slow down the system and its performance and make everything run a little slower and sluggish, which we're a fast-paced society. We don't like that. Also, you want to add swap, and this will allow less frequently accessed information of running programs to be written to a disk, opposed to it just sitting on your RAM memory. This will lighten memory, and it's not recommended for SSD drives. If server is virtualized, take a snapshot of the current configuration as a best practices and hardening technique. As these techniques are implemented, you want to make sure you keep up with that. Now on to hardening of the Ubuntu operating system. First thing you want to do is you want to disable root, just like they stated in best practices. Ubuntu does this by default, so you want to make sure if you do end up with a package that it does not have it disabled, you want to go ahead and get that done. Instead of having a root account running, you want to go ahead and create pseudo user accounts. Next thing you want to do is evaluate the home directory and its permissions for the users. Default shows that each user can read and execute in another user's home directory. As we all know, this is going to be a disaster if people can start stepping over the line into other people's directories and systems. You want to set password requirements that are larger than a 6-character default that they already have in there. You want to make sure that they are longer and that they are nice and complicated, so it is harder for someone to get into there and crack that password. You want to ensure that the password expiration is also set. You don't want people changing their password every 5 years. You want to try to move that about to a good 6 months. A year's kind of pushing it, but definitely maybe every 6 months is a good practice to have, whether it's a best practice or a practice of your own. You can also want to disable SSH access by disabling users. Excuse me. By default, even disabled accounts can still SSH in. If using an external database authentication, you want to ensure that both external and local accounts are disabled and the users no longer need access. Next best practice is to disable the Control-Alt-Delete feature. Anybody with access to this to the physical terminal can hit Control-Alt-Delete and reboot the system without actually having to log in. So you might not want that happening if you are in the middle of work and it is not saved. You want to set up firewall rules via the IP tables. IP masquerading. This makes it so traffic leaving an internal server to the internet is masked by a gateway device. You want to monitor your firewall logs. This helps out in viewing and finding attacks and identifying them and figuring out what's wrong with it, within the network and these attacks. AppArmor is another thing for the hardening system. I believe we are going to be reporting on this on our next presentations. This combines individual programs to a set list of files. You want to utilize encryption to and from server when possible. Encrypt FS automatic encryptions or encrypts, the home partition when one goes to set it up. It assists the users in encrypting other partitions as well. You want to limit SUE access to only the administrators. You don't ever want everybody to have that access across the board. That can get a little disastrous. You want to set a strong, very, very strong BIOS security password so only certain people can get in and it's not very easy to access. You want to take some of those critical paths and partition them off with a boot, swap, home, user, var, and is. You want to remove any services that are not needed. This is just like in Windows. Anything that's not needed that is running, you can go ahead and get rid of. Telnet used to be a big one over here on the Linux side that was used. Now it's kind of a null and void, so it can be disabled. IPv6 is also not really used in Linux yet. That is more on the version 4. Alrighty, now I'm going to go over the Ubuntu 16.04.1 LTS firewall, which is also known as IP tables. This provides packet filtering, network address translation, and management throughout all the other packets that are out there. It is one of the default settings in Ubuntu that allows traffic through. It operates by comparing network traffic against a set of rules. Within this, the packet characteristics must match the defined rule. Packets are assessed by the rule, and the action that takes place is actually called a target. And a set of rules that the packet is checked against is also a part of comparing the network traffic. That can be used via GUI application or through a terminal interface, which is definitely good for people like me that is a little bit more GUI oriented over the command line. Uncomplicated Firewall USF is Ubuntu's default firewall tool, and it's put into place to ease the IP table configuration. Commands that are used for IPv4 on the IP tables, while IPT table 6 are used for IPv6. These commands from one will not impact the rules from the other version of the between IPv4 and 6. My apologies, that's a tongue twister. Excuse me. IP filtering works on the network layer of the OSI model. I believe we already went over the OSI model during the Windows presentation. It is responsible for ICMP on the data link layer, and it's also can do MAC filtering on the data link layer as well. So it looks like actually the Linux Firewall does a little bit more, or touches on a little bit more of the layers throughout the OSI model than the Windows Firewall does. Layer 4 actually focuses on protocols or ports. Some of the best practices that are out there for Ubuntu 16.04.1 LTS Firewall, aka IP tables, is that you want it is preferred. The preferred method is to drop or not allow traffic through whenever it doesn't send a reply back to the sender. Before implementing those drop rules, you want to make sure all the other rules are out there, validated and working properly. You want to use comments for complicated rules. Rule that's really long. If you don't comment on it, you're probably going to remember not going to remember what half that rule was or was supposed to do. So it's always good to kind of make that notation there. You want to make the rules as granular as you can. You want to also, at the end of the policy, you want to add a drop traffic rule there. You want to make sure that all rules are properly documented. You want to also enable logging and ensure these logs are being stored and monitored at all times. Frequently save your rules, just like saving your presentation right now. You want to save it multiple times or you might lose it. Also, you want to take the complicated rule sets and you want to break them up a little bit to make it a little bit of an easier flow. Alrighty, hardening for your Ubuntu Firewall, aka IP tables. You want to make sure that IP tables is obviously started. Use a sudo command to get that taken care of. You want to check the current firewall rules that are implemented. You could do that by the use of a simple sudo command. Remember, disable that root ahead of time, so you just do everything in sudo from here on out. That sudo command is just -L, sudo IP tables -L, and that'll bring you up all your current firewall rules that you have into place. You also want to put those drop rules at the last line of the rule set. You can do an input-output IP table rule or command on the command line to do this. You only want to allow the services that are absolutely needed through. An example is SSH. You want to take those rules and make sure you set an expiration date for those rules when it is called for. And you want to also make sure you do not delete you want to make it where you do not delete the rules whenever the server reboots, because that will be a disaster to lose all your hard work.